Welcome to the Business of Apparel podcast. This is the place to learn how to start and scale your own apparel brand and fill it with loyal customers for years to come. I'm your host, Rachel Erickson, owner and CEO of Unmarked Street. I can't wait to share this episode with you. Welcome back to the Business of Apparel podcast. Today I have with me Brittney Tupa, who is an amazing friend of mine. She and I got the chance to work together when we were at Specialized, and Brittney is a supply chain expert and someone who I learned just so much from when I was working with her at Specialized. Supply chain is something that I knew nothing about when I started working with Brittney, and she was just so kind and welcoming and inviting to kind of bring me into her world so that I could learn about her job and her role and everything that she was doing so that I could be better at my job too. So welcome, Brittney. I'm so excited to have you on today.
Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and be part of this journey that you've been on with all of your content. I'm absolutely excited for you.
Thank you. Awesome. Well, we will get into everything about supply chain and some of the great topics that you've taught me, I think, even through the last several years. But I'd love for you to just give a quick background of you and what you've been doing through the industry and what kind of led you to where you are today.
Yeah, so I feel like my career has been like an interesting web and flow through the industry of apparel, fashion, active outdoor. I actually started my career out of college working for a small jewelry brand that was using recycled materials. It kind of ended up being an internship that led to a job that I never thought it would expand to. It was actually on Shark Tank.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. And I went into it thinking that I wanted to do PR and all of this other work for them, and actually ended up going into more product development, working with the factories to expand this business, and found that I really loved that. I also learned that I didn't want to work in high fashion.
Sure.
And I wanted to work on product that was way more relatable to the people I was friends with, a community that I felt would really use product to better their life, better their relationship with their bodies and outdoor. So then I ended up going to a brand called Lucy Activewear that was owned by VF. A lot of people still remember it, and it makes my heart really happy that people still own it, love it, and know it.
I loved the Lucy stores whenever I went into them. It was such a good brand.
It was an incredible brand, and actually that place taught me so much. A lot of my dearest mentors and friends I knew from there. I did sourcing there, so a lot of cost engineering, working with design, fit and development. I just learned a lot more about the apparel industry there and what it took to make a garment specifically for women, which is a whole nother feat in itself.
Oh, yeah.
And from there, I was there for a few years. Lucy eventually got shut down, which was very sad. But there I pivoted to another VF brand, the North Face. And then there I went more into the product world. I was on the quality assurance team. So basically there I was taking care of the North Face brand. If there was a problem with any product, either found at the factory, from a customer, warranty, any of that, it was basically figuring out, okay, what was the problem? What went wrong? How do we figure out how to solve it? And then how do we inject it back into design and development to hopefully make sure that problem doesn't happen again? That was a huge learning for me about product in general, working cross-functionally, relationship building, and then just building excellent product for the end use, which could be going on a walk or being an alpinist.
Yeah.
So that was pretty great. And then from there, I went to Specialized. So again, took another little pivot into supply chain, kind of rounding out some of that operational foundation that I have of understanding, again, how product is made, where it's made, really tied to relationships and connecting the business to the needs of the business. And ultimately, the job with supply chain is having a demand and supplying it. So there's a lot of pieces.
Oh, yeah.
It sounds much easier than it is. And I will say, because of the pandemic, I think there was this interesting moment of the word supply chain became kind of a zeitgeist word of everybody knew what it was. Everybody saw it in the newspaper every day because it was so heavily impacted by COVID. So it was this time in my career of being able to say what my job was, and people are like, oh, I know what that is. Hard. So yeah, I landed there, and now I'm currently, again, another little pivot. I'm working for Stanley, which I think the world mostly knows for their famous quencher cups.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I've got like 2 of them in my cupboard.
Social media has really blown that up, and I've kind of done another pivot. I'm a project manager for their sales operations team. So
amazing.
A long journey through operations from beginning to end at all these different little parts. But at the end of the day, I think what I have loved and learned with all of the jobs I've had in my career is I really love relationships. I love product. I love all of the unique individuals that it takes to actually build these things that may seem really simple to the end consumer. And I think that's what really makes me excited about all these opportunities that I've had.
That's amazing. What a such a cool and diverse career that you've had. And it's like, I feel like you have so much farther to go and you're just going to keep crushing it. But one thing that what I love about what you just kind of went through too is something that I've been trying to talk about a little bit at the Business of Apparel is, you know, when we go into fashion design school as fashion designers, a lot of us have this image of like what we're going to do when we get out of school, and we have these like beautiful creative jobs, and we do pencil sketches, and we're watercolor painting croquis all day, and we're like flipping through these beautiful like fabric books. And at the end of the day, there are some people who get to do that, but the vast majority of us do not. And so one thing I've been trying to kind of educate everyone here on is there are so many different roles that you can take within the apparel industry and be successful and be like an integral part to a team. And so like, I just think everything that you just mentioned is such a good like invitation into a lot of different roles. And I haven't talked a lot about supply chain on this podcast, but I would love for you to kind of a little bit break down like, what does a supply chain leader do in the apparel industry and kind of how it relates to like maybe the role that you've had when you are a supply chain leader?
Yeah. So I think a big part of that is, like I mentioned before, is what's usually sending these signals is demand. So demand is basically your customer, which could be the end consumer, or it could be somebody who's buying something wholesale, saying, our customers want this product and this is what we're expecting. That's usually tied to some forecasting work and can go down at the granular level to conversations that are being had. It could be reads on data that's being received, point of sale information. So it's basically taking that demand and then kind of compiling it with what a product team has come up to say, okay, this is what our line stands for, or this is the latest and greatest that we need to inject into and produce. And then basically taking that and going to a vendor, or what we call like, I guess, a factory, and then also any suppliers that are providing the raw materials for that factory to produce that, to then work with them to figure out what do we need to supply that demand. So that could be anything from booking out capacity, and capacity could be like within a production line. It could come down to tooling if that's being used, depending on what you're actually making. And then it could just be anything to prep to produce or ship things too. So all of that is kind of combined. That's a very simple way of putting it. I was going to say,
it's that you make it sound very simple, but it is very complicated to get all of those logistics to line up just right.
Yeah. And that was the hardest part during COVID, is that, yes, you had all of these items that sound really simple, but a lot of that is based on historical. So it's based off of historical demand, or it's based off of historical lead times. So the lead time being the amount of time it takes to get something done, whether it's the amount of production time to cut and sew or print or receive materials, whether it be fabrics or trims, or the amount of lead time for something to ship. Yep. So we had this, an idea in the industry of what that looked like. And then COVID came and turned everything on its head.
Yeah.
All of those lead times and that demand that we relied on basically changed, and nobody really knew how to read them. Anybody from the customers to the factory to logistics. So that became a little bit crazy. And some things, again, have improved. I think everybody can see that just when you go to a store and there's actually things on the shelves now. But it's also changed things. It's changed how we think about it, how we talk about it, the information we relate to. But I think it's also changed things, a bit painful to get there, but changed things for the better too, of how we're thinking about business, how we're holding inventory, how we're planning out a line. I think that's all changed a lot. And also just how we're holding relationships as well, and the expectations that we have with our teams we're working with directly, with our business partners who are domestic or overseas. I think it's changed a lot. So yeah, all of those reads are super important. And it's just interesting from business to business how people are handling that today.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, I know like when we were working together, one thing that we were working on together a lot is like a really, really robust like forecasting system. And how do we make sure that we're forecasting all of the right numbers at all of the right times and getting all of the right inputs? And something I've been noticing as I've been working with new clients and kind of going through the pandemic in kind of a different way than you did is that people are moving away from forecasting a little bit because it is really unpredictable. And as much as forecasting used to be, and maybe again will be in the future, who knows, like the best way to make sure that you're securing the production capacity that you need, I'd love for you to just kind of talk about if you're seeing kind of a shift in that. And are people kind of moving away from forecasting? And do you ever see it coming back?
Yeah, I think throughout my entire career in all those positions I've been in, I think one of the things people are always just kind of giving a deep sigh on and an eye roll is just any type of conversation about forecasting.
Yeah. Everyone hates it.
Because it's always the conversation of you need it for the business because you need it for planning purposes, especially when you're setting, revenue goals of like you're wanting to know what you're going to come out with the end of the year with. So you have to tie it to something. And also ordering, buying anything, booking anything. You need to give people a read on what's it going to be.
Yep.
And you want it to be as close to what your production numbers are going to be as possible, because if there's any delta, you're leaving holes. So you're leaving holes to lost business on the table if you booked much lower, and then actually your business is much higher. So you're missing out on an opportunity. And if you're overbooking it, if you're booking materials, you're going to have excess. Yep. So it's having to deal with that excess. So then you have to feel what you want to do with that, whether it's use it or put it somewhere else, or in some businesses get rid of it somehow, which is environmental impact.
Yep.
And then also just being a good business partner too. So if you're signing up for these numbers and giving somebody capacity, if you're booking that out and promising that to somebody, and at the end of the day, you're moving away from that, you're kind of leaving somebody else high and dry who could have used that opportunity for another customer to be making money on their end.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
So it's this really hard balance of wanting to forecast, provide it to everybody around you, being as close as possible. And I think where the sigh and that eye roll usually comes is it's just really hard to do. Because like I was mentioning before, prior to COVID, I think some people got in a rhythm of purchasing power and trends and things like that. But that kind of got turned upside down because some businesses, just went crazy and had nothing to compare historicals to. And it was really just like figuring out in the wind, like what direction it was going to go and what you want to bet big on. Because going back to lead times, you had to do that in order to get materials to even meet that demand. So I think forecasting is important. I think the way people are going about it has changed. And I think it goes back to how people are purchasing too. I think a lot of the old ways of purchasing, like just in time was like a big key word a lot of people used. that kind of got put into question over COVID because some things just were never in time. And a lot of people, you know, in the apparel industry, it's based a lot about seasons, no matter what you're really making. In the outdoor industry, usually, you know, your spring is going to be really big. If you're doing just like camping wear, active wear, because that's when people are outside. But there's also things like holiday or back to school. Like, no matter the business, there's these different highs and lows. So taking that into account as well. So some people are still taking into account all those highs and lows, but also when they're purchasing and also to reflect their inventory needs. Does the way we were purchasing before make sense for those businesses within a season?
Yeah.
For some it may, for some it may not. And then it might depend on what you're actually making too. If it's something that feels fresh, new, it's going to be a drop. Maybe it's like a color palette that's really interesting or really different. Or maybe it's something that's black that you're going to always carry. That's your tried and true bread and butter styles. Like those may be different. So it's really analyzing like, what is your product assortment? What is your customer really wanting from you? And then kind of aligning with how you're forecasting, how you're buying, and how do you work around that with your business partners too? Because at the end of the day, yes, you're planning towards that revenue, but you're also planning towards those business partnerships on what information do you need to provide to them so they can then act on your behalf and make that product for you.
That's such a good point. Yeah, I think that's really good. And I think I've also been seeing some people kind of move toward like try to move away a little bit from seasonality. And so I think that's helping with making forecasting a little bit more flexible, where instead of having to say, you know I'm going to buy 100,000 units and I need it to ship it all at this one single time. I think a lot of people are trying to shift, like, we know over this 6-month period, we're going to order 100,000 units, but we're going to trickle it in and it's going to drop, kind of like you said, like, we're going to do this collection of yellow here, and then we're going to do a collection of hot pink, and then our black basics are going to come out. And I think kind of thinking about launching apparel in a way like that, that's not a single drop or a single season, is changing the game a little bit too.
Yeah, I think the thought of those flows is really important. And then I think there's also this element of, yes, you're producing all of this, but a majority of these goods are being made overseas too. And what's the point of view and perspective of shipping all of it too?
Yeah.
So something to keep in mind. I know it's always a topic of conversation of environmental impact too, of like, if you're doing quick drops and the size of them, how are they being shipped? When are they going to get there?
Yeah.
Airing, sending things by sea. Like, those are all little things that kind of compile into one of having a perspective on how you're producing, how you're shipping, how things are getting into doors, that I think people, again, are talking about more post-COVID. And as, being conscious about how we're making things.
Yeah.
Shipping plays a lot into that.
It's so true.
Not just cost, but just carbon footprint.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think it tends to be one of the trickier parts about it, because so much of it depends on timeline and like the structure of your business. But yeah, I have seen a really big shift in the industry of people just, I think there's a lot of confusion. I'm not going to go too far down this rabbit hole because I have some other good questions to ask you, but I do think there's a shift of people who are really advocating for sustainable practices when it comes not just to like choosing fabrics or using recyclable packaging, but like sustainable processes, and shipping to me kind of falls into that bucket. But I think there's still a long way to go. I think people are kind of confused on how to create standards that could be like an industry-wide thing. And so that's something that I see, maybe coming in the next decade for the apparel industry, but I think it's going to be slow going.
Yeah, I hope so too, because I think that's a really key thing to highlight, that a lot of people just imagine the end item in a store as being like the impact, but working so much with product and with warranty and things like that, a lot is put in even to just sampling.
Yes,
like
exactly.
The processes within design, development, how you're laying out a calendar, making decisions, and just the impact of getting and receiving all of those. has such an impact that isn't really visible unless you're in it.
Yeah.
And you're seeing that back and forth and the amount that's being done. There's a huge impact there that I think is just being scratched on the surface to understand.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think there's just so much more to explore there.
Yeah.
But I want to take you back a little bit to your QA days and talk a little bit about vendors for a minute. And I don't think I've ever spoken before about vendor scorecards, but I feel like that's something that you are an expert in, and we never quite got our shit together, specialized to do proper vendor scorecards. But it's such a cool topic. I'd love for you to just tell the audience a little bit about like what is a vendor scorecard, how you use them, and how they kind of can help a brand.
Yeah, vendor scorecards are such a great tool, and not to underestimate, it's not just simply like a elementary school scorecard where you get an A, B, and a C. There's a lot more built into it, and you have to have a robust understanding of what fits right for your company, your product, what's expected out of those, and what's expected out of your vendors too. It can be such a great tool for analyzing who are your key business partners, who do you want to grow with, who do you want to move back from, what are you expecting out of them? And a lot of people, I think, don't consider to where it's an opportunity to reward people as well, business partners. I think people consistently think of it as like, oh, you're in trouble. Oh, you're getting points knocked down. Like, I think it's an opportunity to highlight what people are doing really well and what you can pull out information from one vendor to kind of push towards your other vendors of saying, you're excelling here, you're doing this well, let's teach everybody else and make it a standard.
I love that. Yeah.
So I think there's that. And also back to like rewarding business, as in, you've done this super well, we'd love to give you more, or how do we make this a more integrated partnership? So I think it highlights some really good points. And also it can highlight where you can gain efficiencies certain places. So in like a sourcing realm, it kind of goes back to what I just talked about, rewarding business, figuring out all that. But back to like my QA world, what we'd use vendor scorecarding a lot too was when goods would be coming into a distribution center or DC, we would use that to kind of score against when it was a really busy season. So say fall back to school and we had a bunch of backpacks coming in, or winter jackets and things like that. You could kind of expect like, oh, this person has a pretty high vendor scorecard. They're consistently delivering. All their packaging is good. Their quality is usually good. We can kind of flag them to say, hey, there's goods coming from them. They only need like a basic once over to make sure everything's fine. And it can just proceed down the line. Where there's some other ones where it's like, oh, we've seen a lot of shortages in cartons, or we've seen quality issues. You can kind of, again, flag that to a team there to say, pay a little bit more attention to anything coming from here. And sometimes it's not even to their detriment. Like, they did nothing wrong. It could be there was a big weather event coming from Southeast Asia. And so, we can expect that there might be some salt damage. Because again, these are coming in containers on boats over the ocean, salt water. So you never know what they're going to come into port with.
So true.
So that can be something to highlight as well. Or again, any other weather events, or maybe there's something going on at the factory you just need to check. It was just a way to highlight and flag things and have this knowledge of a vendor that's something to share out with other people, not just the people who have that day-to-day conversation with the vendor, just more knowledge on them than, just the name, where they're located, and maybe a few phone numbers that some people may know. It's just more information. And I think that's a lot about supply chain and sourcing about vendors. It's having as much knowledge as possible to have the best relationship, to have the best conversations, to be making decisions for the business. Because at the end of the day, they're a business partner, and you're only as successful as the people you work with.
Yeah.
So how to track those relationships, how to find opportunities to make them better, and how to highlight that what might be going wrong, I think is an opportunity in a vendor scorecard if you're willing to invest the time and the energy to make it really robust.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And you've mentioned a few times too how it can help, how you like to, and how something like that can help to, build relationships with a lot of your manufacturers or factories. And so I have never really been part of a good vendor scorecard process, but I'd love for you to talk a little bit about, have you ever done it where you've gone like physically to the factory and kind of went through the process in that way? Or do you usually find that like factory visits are best for relationship building and kind of just getting through whatever key, like urgent thing is kind of going on at that time?
I think it depends on the business, and I think it depends on the relationship. I think like any relationship, whether it's a friend, a family, like it's always going to be different. I think that's kind of a part of a read of that relationship. There's some that will be wonderful. It'll be very open. It'll be very regular conversations. They'll be telling you what's happening in the industry, what's happening with other customers, what's going on internally. Then there'll be others that maybe feel a bit more strained or, for reasons that may be related to you or not related to you. It might be just how they conduct business. So I think it might be different from vendor partner to vendor partner of how to approach that. I do think something that is important to remember is if you're going to be doing vendor scorecarding and you're going to be talking with them about it, it's good to do it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I think like any type of putting something regular into your routine, like a doctor's visit or something, it's good to have those conversations when things are really good and when things are really bad. So then you have that baseline of, things were good here. What was a part of that? What was attributing to that? Was it somebody who was on the staff that maybe went away? Is it because they added a new line? Is there a new building? Or did something happen in the community where something was strained or something happening in the world, like a pandemic? Like, it's good to have that baseline of that was then, this is now, to be able to talk through all of that. And then just have that regularity of like, they can know to expect this. So if other things are coming up too, say like, it's time for an audit of the factory, or say it's time to award new business or talk about some type of new plans. They know to expect it and prepare for it. I think having those regular meetings, I'm always a firm believer in agendas and giving people time and knowing what to expect to be talking through things, especially if you're dealing with a business partner where maybe their staff, English isn't their first language. I think that's polite and considerate to give them a heads up, give them time to prepare of what to expect, what you're hoping to get out of it, and just the value of time. So I think being really regular, being very transparent and honest are pretty key to that as well.
I think that's just good advice in general for almost managing any part of your life. Like even like you said, like incorporating doctor's offices. And if you're managing people too, making sure that they're getting feedback from you on a regular basis and not just at their annual review. So I love that. I think that's amazing advice. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and teaching all about supply chain and vendors and all of that good stuff. Your expertise always blows me out of the water. So thank you for coming on and sharing. And I look forward to maybe having you on again in the future if you're interested in talking more topics about the logistics of the apparel industry.
Oh, it was so good to talk to you. And yes, I would be happy anytime. I can talk about this all day. So. Pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you.
All right. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you so much for listening to the Business of Apparel podcast. I would so appreciate hearing your thoughts on the show. And if you know someone who could benefit from it, please share it with them. My biggest desire is to help other apparel professionals understand the nuances of our industry so we can all work toward making better product for a better world. If you would like to connect further, I'd love to invite you to send me a message through my website, unmarkstreet.com, where I do weekly trainings through my video channel, a monthly newsletter, and offer so many resources to help you start and scale a profitable apparel brand.